News, news. News is everywhere. In the morning when I get up, I run down and I open my front porch to find my newspaper waiting for me. I do that because I want to know, what was that helicopter hovering over my house for? And secondly, what was the final score of that game that I couldn't stay up to watch? Whether I'm actually looking at it on newspaper or using my iPhone as I'm commuting in on Metro, I can be watching Facebook or Twitter or any other social media site to see what's trending in the news. So I had the opportunity this summer to attend a museum called the Newseum. This is a giant news gathering site that opened in 2008 in April in Washington, D.C. And if you enjoy news, this is a one-stop shop for you to gather all sorts of historical news information in one location. I live in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., and I have the opportunity where I can jump on the Metro and run down and see any museum that I want on a whim. Well, as I mentioned, this summer, I decided to go find out what my colleagues were talking about. They said that when they arrived at the museum, that there was a 74-foot Tennessee marble emblem that was sitting there that had the First Amendment actually etched in stone. So I saw that, and one of the things that I took away from the Newseum was that it makes you want to walk away with the understanding that news is necessary. News is important. News is part of your life every day. And that is supported by what the USA Today newspaper reported in April 2008. They said news is necessary to the functioning democracy. News happens every day. You feel the news is fun, the news is cool, and news matters. Times haven't always been easy since the Newseum opened up. As I said, they opened in 2008. At this point, in 2015, they are $307 million in debt. So the Washington Post reported that in July, they had recently hired a new CEO by the name of Jeffrey Huberst. He's a 54-year-old Yale Princeton graduate who has a passion for news. He shares a passion that says to the mission, to champion First Amendment freedoms and the right to free expression. That is why unanimously he was voted as the CEO for the Newseum. And he's going to tackle their debt by coming up with different fundraising events. So let's get started. If you want to know what the exact location is to the Newseum, it is 555 Pennsylvania Avenue, Northwest, Washington, D.C. It is a blend of high-tech and historical media information filled with galleries and theaters. This is a relatively inexpensive event that's perfect for the family. I attended the museum on August 28th, 2015. I used my AAA card, and I paid $19.99 for a two-day pass. There are 4 main points of interest that I would like for you to take away. The first thing that impressed me was the fact that they had a beautiful gallery done for the September 11th event. The gallery explored the day's events in what I call extraordinary challenges faced with by all the journalists trying to report on this news-shaking event throughout the world. And there were hundreds and hundreds of original newspapers that had been framed and put in their original state, talking about and showing pictures of the day. And you can only imagine that some of the material from different parts of the world contained some objectionable things that some visitors may have thought were unacceptable. But the cool thing that I saw was they had an enormous artifact from that day where you can actually see the twisted broadcast antenna that was on top of the World Trade Center. Secondly, during my 6-hour visit, I learned about history, humanities, and media coverage. And it was all shown in 15 different galleries and 15 different theaters that I stopped and paid attention to. The museum had all sorts of historic artifacts, and it had prize-winning photography and interactive exhibits. There was a 4D theater and many monitors where you could actually feel like you were reliving history because you could step into the eyes of what the reporters and the photographers were trying to share with you. And what they were trying to share was our First Amendment freedom of speech. The third thing that I want you to take away is the Berlin Wall Gallery. That was by far one of the most interesting galleries there. I obviously studied the East and West Divide of Berlin when I was in high school. And in 1981, when I heard President Reagan say, "Tear down that wall," and I actually walked into this gallery and I saw 8 original 12-foot high concrete sections of the wall, I was amazed. They also had this really cool guard tower that was looming there in the gallery. They called it Checkpoint Charlie. And it was what the Berlinians knew is the divide for the east and west crossing. So it explains how all of that information that was trying to be parlayed in that exhibit was meaning to me as I related back to it from my high school days. And lastly, the museum definitely tapped into my emotions. There is so much history, those original artifacts, and the media was able to transfer me to places in the world that obviously I had never been. I saw the content of history that occurred before and during my lifetime, especially when it touched something that has happened over the last year, and that is losing the lives of our reporters who put themselves in harm's way. And it's not only the reporters, but it's also the photographers. They are out there on the front line trying to report to us what's going on through freedom of speech, our First Amendment. And unfortunately, they risk their lives and they have been executed, they've been beheaded, they've been tortured to death. And then you'll remember this past year when we look back at the journalists from the United States and Britain that had been beheaded by ISIS. So it all means something. And when these photographers or these journalists die in harm's way trying to bring us media, there's pictures of them that get added to the wall in the museum. So it's very touching. Since I attended the museum, I signed up for yet another newspaper. I received the Washington Post, and I also get a local newspaper, the Frederick Post. Both of them I read front to back every day, priceless. For $2.25, the news is brought to me. So in summary, I've shared with you a lot of hands-on experience of what I enjoyed from the museum. If you're in the Washington, D.C. area, I hope that you'll take the opportunity to stop by. The museum is a one-stop shop news history lane that I think that you will thoroughly enjoy.